Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is what I do for a living, so I have to make sure that I can be heard wherever. 25 years in college admission and lots of different types of venues. So, again, my name is Tamara Siler. Professionally, I work as the Senior Associate Director of Admission and Coordinator of Minority Recruitment for Rice University. Just finishing my 25th year of doing that. And personally, sort of on the other side of things, I've been an actress in Houston since 1985. So, yeah, we don't like to think about that. I'm kind of, you know, those roles that I'm getting kind of are shifting now. So like the very last show that I did was over at the Ensemble Theater, and I kind of made a big leap, so I played someone who was 76 years old. So, well, thank you. But what I'm here today, and I by no means will be able to talk about equality in 20 minutes in its entirety. But what I hope to do is to inspire you to think about equality. And the question that's on your name tags, I've been walking and looking at everybody's answers. Yes, I'm not staring at, I know what it's like to stare at boobies. So, and when somebody stares, it's like up here. But some of your answers, I think, you know, it would be great to see some of you like get together and collaborate, because many of you have some of the same answers: the women's rights, equal pay, education reform, ending slavery, ending human trafficking. So there's a lot of mindsets. And I did a search online and just wanted to put the word equality in and see what came up. And pretty much there's probably as many answers to what equality or what goals in equality we should have as there are people in this room. So we shouldn't necessarily all be working in the same space, because I think people working in the space that's passionate to them gets us to better equality as a global type of idea. So, but I guess I'm really here to talk about my story and how I got to where I am. And it starts out very modest. It's not like anybody starts out thinking, I'm going to move the needle on equality when they're a kid. That's not necessarily, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a social justice warrior. I mean, that's not necessarily what you think about. I'm a native Houstonian. I was born here in the city. I actually pulled out my birth certificate to kind of look at it, just what it said. And I was born to my parents, who were both listed as Negro on the birth certificate. My dad's occupation was listed as serviceman because he was in the Air Force. There was no spot for my mother to have employment. Like there was no spot on the actual birth certificate. So I guess the assumption is that her job was just to have me. It's like, so, huh?
What decade are we talking about?
I was born actually 53 years ago today. It's like, so. So 1964, which was a very actually, kind of important year. I mean, it was the year, we're talking about education reform. Actually, the school where I've made my change that very same year was suing itself to basically allow black people to go to Rice, because before that time, they were not able to do so. In our charter, it was written that it was for the white citizens of Texas. Or the white citizens, I'm not sure and in essence, other people were able to get in, I mean, because anybody of Hispanic extraction was just called white, and anybody who was Asian was just called white. So really it was just black people who couldn't go to Rice. And so for me, that's kind of a nice roundabout, is that the very year I was born was the year that the first African Americans were able to go to my university. I actually was, my parents had me, but then I was actually raised by my great-grandparents. Yes, my great-grandparents, who were already on Social Security by the time I came to them. So being lower income is not necessarily something you know when you're growing up. I mean, everybody in your neighborhood is in lower income, so it's not something you notice or anything like that. And to be quite honest, my grandparents gave me an incredible life. I felt like they saved as much as they could. We did things frugally. We did things that my grandmother cooked, Mama cooked every night. So it's not like I ever went through life knowing I was low income until I actually started interacting with other people who had more money. So it's just interesting, perspective. So I don't know, for you, when was the first time you realized the world was not quite equal? And it's like, just think about that for a minute. Like, what was the time that you figured that out? I mean, certainly when I started school at 5, wasn't thinking about that necessarily. But when I had some conversations about, when do we begin to notice differences? We begin to notice differences as children. I mean, as babies. Like, they have evidence that says we begin to notice the differences in people because as a child, when you're holding your child can actually feel when your heartbeat changes. They can feel when you are reacting to the stimuli around you. And that children can begin to see differences and relate that to how their parents feel. One of my really good friends remembers when he was a baby, his mother told him that he was in an elevator with her. Someone walked in with him, and it happened to be a black man. He's white, she's white, and he was sitting, and his mother said she looked at him, and he reached out and he touched his skin and tried to rub the color off because he didn't understand what was going on. And the gentleman said, nah, it didn't come off. It's like, but again, it's not necessarily that at that point we notice differences, but then we wonder at what point do we begin to ascribe value to those differences? So I don't know when you first felt inequality. I mean, there are things that now I look back on as an adult that I didn't realize as a child. I didn't realize the number of times that we had to stop on the side of the road for us to use the bathroom on the side of the road because we couldn't go to a bathroom in an actual place. My father used to come and pick me up for the summers, and he would drive at night because there were fewer police officers on the road at night, and he would receive fewer opportunities for him to be stopped. If we stopped for food, we would have to go to the back of the building to be served. And sometimes we had to depend on sort of the kindness of strangers, if you will, that somebody actually would want to serve us food. Those are things that, as a child, my parents didn't necessarily, there was nothing that was obvious. But now that I look back on it, it's like, oh, that's why we did that, or that's why that happened. And again, it was just the way of life. You didn't think about it, but I think it began to nestle inside of me that as somebody who was smart, I had a responsibility to my community. It wasn't just about me getting an education. Everything that I did was a win for my community. Everything that on the flip side of that though, and the burden that very often students of color carry is that if you make a mistake, it's often not felt as a mistake for you, it's a mistake for the whole community. You feel like you failed everyone around you because you don't really feel like you have that threshold to make mistakes. So I was a straight A student, and all of a sudden I started to get into the arts. I started to sing, I started to do things, and it fed me in a different way. I was not this person that you see today growing up. I was very, very kind of introverted, really didn't talk very much. My best friend was kind of my mouthpiece. She's a firebrand. She would often, would speak up for me when I wouldn't speak up. But the arts kind of gave me a voice. Once I started getting my confidence, like, I can do this. There's something that I do beyond books, because often you're ridiculed for being smart. It's like, that's not cool. It was like that, it's like, oh, you're the bookworm. I mean, by the time I was in 4th grade, I had these glasses, I had these that were coming out. I had buck teeth. I mean, it was like just this, and I was smart. So those things often made me a target for people making fun. And but the arts was one place where people didn't make fun. Like when you did well in choir or you did well in theater, people kind of smiled and they accepted that. And so that gave me a level of confidence that just began to grow and grow and grow. And then I went from elementary school. I mean, how many of you remember teachers from your elementary school? Somebody, look at that, yeah. It's like, I can almost remember every teacher and the inspiration that they provided for me. And I certainly hope that kids today are getting that. Because, I remember my 1st grade teacher, because when you grow up with great-grandparents, sometimes they don't know things, they forget things. They didn't really, I can't tell you how many times I came on picture day and I was not dressed because they didn't know it was picture day. And so, but I remember my 1st grade teacher who basically said, who took me on, so I came to school and she was like, come on, she took me aside, fixed my hair, put it all together. That was Miss Nagel, who became Mrs. Eldridge, and I didn't understand how that happened. I was like, when they came back and they said, oh, your teacher for this semester is Mrs. Eldridge, and I'm like, but what happened to Miss Nagel? She got married. I remember Miss Anderson, who in 4th grade, who actually took me and Roy Nelson to the HISD Center to pick out books for school. I felt so special on that day because I was being given the opportunity to set the educational path for my fellow classmates. I remember Miss Blossom Williams in 6th grade, who used to host empowerment workshops for all of the girls at lunchtime. She would bring us all together, make us bring our lunches into the room, and she would sit there and talk about her life experiences. And she would say, I've been married several times. and she said, but you know what? You always have your own money. You always have your own resources. You never let somebody take something away from you. You establish yourself as a person before you try and establish yourself as a wife. And it's now I missed out on the whole wife thing because I never got married. But but I just remember all of those things making me feel valued, making me feel wanted, making me feel like even when I was made aware of my differences, I was fine with that because of the empowerment that I had received. So then I went to a middle school where I got more arts encouragement and more educational encouragement. I remember my history teacher, and I ended up being a history major at Rice. But I also remember my music teacher, who was this very distinguished African-American man who ended up giving me, on the last day of school, his box set of Beethoven. And he was like, and he saw something in me and wanted to give some piece of himself to me. I didn't know what gay was at that point. I think looking back now, I know that he was, and that actually solidified sort of that started to me to think about, my relationship with the gay community, and the influences that I had beyond that, and teachers who were probably themselves dealing with their own set of circumstances, taking time to inspire me. And then I went to HSPVA, and that was a great experience. I was a little sad to read the story yesterday that HSPVA is not as diverse as it used to be. It was something that I suspected because I am the admission officer for PVA, and I've noticed a difference in the type of applicants that I'm getting from there. And it's nothing about I don't want other students to have opportunity, but I remember for a low-income student who was looking for something different, HSPVA was a godsend for me. It took me out of my zone school and gave me a window to continue to build as not only an artist, but as a person, but also as a student. Because really, my great-grandparents, if I was not a good student, I was not going to do the arts. Literally. They were like, That, they didn't even understand this thing that I wanted to do. It was all they saw it as an interruption in terms of the time you had to study. So I had to be a good student to be able to, do my art. So this is something that I actually do presentations on the value of arts education in both sort of student life and also in college admission. And I can tell you there are things that the arts teach students that are invaluable in other parts of their life, in terms of working as a team, in terms of working towards a goal, in terms of being able to better manage your time, in terms of self-exploration. And I think all of those things are valuable in the fight for equality. Equality is a personal thing. I mean, if you think about it, people are driven by the things that they're passionate about. And often that's either tied to their own experience or to some experience of someone they love, they care about, they want something better to do. The reason we engage in this work of equality is because we want to leave a better world, not necessarily, and we may not even realize it in our own lifetimes, but we want to leave a better world for somebody else. So how did I get into, so I went to Rice. Rice was, on the end of it, I appreciate everything that Rice gave to me. When I entered Rice, we used to joke you could count us all in terms of black people on basically 2 hands and a couple of toes. And everybody would walk up to me and say, "Oh, are you an athlete? What sport do you play?" I'm like, "I don't play any sports." Have you seen me? I actually tried to play sports during my first year. I got hit in the head by that softball. I was like, I'm good. I'm gonna stay on the theater side of things. But I mean, that was these were innocent questions, but often, you had to have a backbone to stand up to those questions, because somebody could erode your confidence by constantly asking you if the only reason you're at a highly selective school is because of your athletic prowess, which of course I had none. And so, and then of course, that's the burden that a lot of students will carry, is that people if they already are asking themselves, should I be here? If there's a female who's interested in computer science and she decides to join that and somebody starts asking her, really questioning her ability, unfortunately, the go-to position for people who are underrepresented in an area is often to ask themselves, should I be here? And instead of I'm telling you, the other people don't ask themselves that. They're like, okay, somebody's not giving me enough. They're not teaching me the right way. They can look at other things, but we tend to question ourselves, both as women and as people of color, as to should we be here when we're having difficulty. And that's one of the main messages I give my students, that come into Rice now. And I say, we picked you, we selected you because we knew you had the tools to be successful. Do not make that your go-to position when you're having trouble. Freshman year will tax anyone. And it's a different way of living, it's a different way of looking at life. Do not go to the position of thinking that you shouldn't be here. We need you here. But that also brings up something that, the burden of the people who are marginalized to sort of educate those who are around them. And I think that's an added burden that a lot of students who are underrepresented in some way face when they go to college, is that, it somehow becomes their responsibility to educate their fellow classmates on how to interact with them. And it's not something that you ask for, it's just something that happens. And you're almost used to it. Like at some point, you're like, okay, I remember my end of my first week, my best friend and I are sitting on the beach, because I won't tell you how many traditions that we had that I would question and say, maybe that's not a tradition that's friendly to all people of all ethnicities and cultures and races. So the end of the week of orientation was a beach trip. And so we all everybody went to the beach. And so my best friend and I are sitting on a blanket, looking at the water. Didn't really care to get in the water, it's Galveston. And this woman, innocently, white woman, walks up to us and says, "Oh my God, I didn't think you people liked the sun." in a different world, that would be a different answer. But like we both kind of looked at her and we just said, no, the sun is good for lots of people and for lots of reasons. We may not want a sun tan, but the sun is good for you. But her question was really not, I didn't feel that it was malice-filled at all. It was really, she didn't know. She thought that no sun. I'm like, and I had that, I would say that was the predominant attitude that I encountered when people made those kind of things, it wasn't that they were being malicious, they just didn't know. Their experience had not brought them in contact with enough people that it would even occur to them that would be an inappropriate thing to say to somebody. You had those experiences, but then you had those other experiences, and I was very fortunate to have professors who wanted me there, who empowered me being there. I did have a couple of professors who clearly did not want me there, did not think I should be there. Nothing compared to the people who came in the 1970s to Rice. I mean, those people, my hat is off to them, the people who were the trailblazers, who've created a community for African Americans there. My hat is off to them. So how did I get into this work? It was definitely not something I thought of. I worked for an oil company right out of college. And I can tell you, every day I would ask myself, do they have more problems with me being a woman? How much time? Okay. Do they have more problems with me being a woman? Or do they have more problems with me being black? I don't know. And I really think it was a woman. It's like, because they would make the female engineers make coffee. And it's like, they were engineers. They had the same titles as their fellow men, and they had to make the coffee in the morning. So I left that world. I did not want to be in that world. It was not for me. And I had a chance to come to Rice. And when I came to Rice, I didn't have any, I wanted to be an admission officer. Like that was fun. It sounded like a great job. Travel, read applications, you get to do presentations. That was all up my alley. I had no idea the impact that I would be able to have. I had no idea that I would be able to create a program that's now in its 22nd year and has been responsible for bringing about 4,000 students of color to campus and changing the face of Rice. I had no idea that I would play a role in changing what Rice looked like. Certainly there's plenty of people to take that credit, but that I would actually have an active role for somebody who, when I was born, wouldn't have even been able to go to the university. To be able to have the power in that time, in 25 years, to now have a community where no ethnicity is a majority any longer. Over 50% of our students are now students of color. To have that power, and I wouldn't have had that power without all the influences before me. So when we talk about equality, what do we really mean? Does it have to be this big project, or is it the things that we do on a day-to-day basis to encourage others, to influence others, to bring a voice to others, to create spaces where we hear more people? To me, that's really what we do. We start with the space around us. Because I think if you really work too hard at trying to make this global change, it's too much. Right. You start here, start changing the place around. Like the great philosopher, Michael Jackson said, you start with the man in the mirror and you make a change. But before I finish, I have to, because I want one person, I'm going to put him on the spot, and he doesn't know I'm about to do this. I hope he won't mind. Eric Shell, will you stand up? This man last year came to me and talked, we're friends, and in the face of the Orlando tragedy, he was struggling. I could tell he was struggling. And we talked about what it meant. He felt that, he's like, how can someone hate us so much for just being who we are? And we talked about it. You can sit if you want to. So lots of people could have just stayed there. he took what he had in terms of his talent, in terms of photography, and he made a small project for himself. How many people did you think you would photograph when you started Pride Project Portrait? So he started a very simple project. I'm going to elevate the stories of the LGBT community and its allies, and I'm going to give them a voice. So he just started taking pictures. And he started, like, you know, just said, please come by. If you want to support me, come by, take your picture, maybe make a couple of statements. And now how many pictures have you taken?
Roughly 3,000.
So, and he's traveled all over the world. Most recent person that you photographed? Melissa Etheridge. So he took a project to elevate the LGBT community and expanded it to something that I think will go on and has given people who are not famous and people who are famous a platform to come together and elevate these stories. And that's one person's way of responding to tragedy. So I think, as I finish up, we all have power. We all have power to make change. It's not something that is impossible. And I think if we each work in our own communities, equality can be real.